Welcome to the Working Genius podcast, where we discuss anything and everything related to the 6 types of working genius and how it impacts your work and your life. I'm Pat Lencioni, your host, joined by the full crew once again. We've got Tracy, Bo, and Cody online. How you guys doing?
Really great.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Love it. We've got Karen sitting here with me, keeping me on track. Matt's in studio, organizing all this. And Cody, what are we talking about today?
Teaching to your genius.
That's right. Here's the thing. Everyone I've ever met has said at one point, I think I could be a teacher, or I've thought about being a teacher. I know I did. And of all the professions in the world, it's the one that every human being pretty much has witnessed them doing it. You know, like people don't know what their parents do at work, but we all have seen plenty of teachers teaching. And everybody gets done with school and they think, yeah, I think I might like to do that. But the question is, what does that mean? Well, it means they're not thinking of the same thing. They're all thinking about how they would go about teaching differently. And I think this is fascinating to explore the different pairings of working genius and how it would influence the kind of teacher we'd like to be, not just the subject matter, but even if 4 different people were teaching 4th grade, they would all go about it very differently based on their working genius. And I think everybody listening to this, whether you're a teacher or not, can relate to how you would go about doing that. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Well, and Pat, I think this is dovetailing into a message that we've said many times on this podcast. Before we get into actually the how would the geniuses go about teaching, this is why we also say, hey, let's talk about the work itself and what your geniuses are. When people say like, well, what type of job should I get if I'm this letter combination? And the answer is, almost all of these combinations can do a variety of different jobs. How you do it is the thing that differentiates you based on your working genius. So I love that we're starting there, because we could do this with marketing or sales or something else, but I love that how ubiquitous this concept of teaching is.
Yes.
Well, and I immediately think about like my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Vixie, and every job is a 6-letter job. Holy cow, trying to manage all of us Riley 4th graders, that was a 6-letter job. And she only had 2 geniuses and had to do a lot of work in her frustrations. So let me apologize, Mrs. Vixie, on behalf of all of the work you had to do in your frustrations. But it's a great example of a job that we can picture where you know all of the elements and the places where you would shine and the places that would wear you out.
Well, and the other thing is, how would you go about doing that to lean into your geniuses so that you weren't constantly in your frustration? Because you ask some people and they see teaching as kind of a monolithic thing. There's one way to do it, but there's not. And it would be great, I think, if all of us had to teach, if you knew your working genius, you'd go about it in different ways. And that's what I want to talk about today is how would you do that? So Tracy, let's start with you. What kind of teacher would you be like? You're a DE, right? You're discernment and enablement. And we'll help you with this. But like, I can imagine you being a teacher. First of all, what kind of grade level do you think you would be most suited to?
I would say probably older kids, maybe. The younger kids would be tough for me just because I don't have any G, and getting them kind of rallied. And I think that would be very difficult for me. But I immediately, Pat, when you told me this topic, I immediately had a position, a type of teacher that would resonate with me. And I think that would be a special education teacher. I think it would be a teacher where I have a much more personal relationship. It's a smaller group of kids, possibly even one-on-one. And I would be able to figure out what they need and discernment, and then take care of them along the way. That is right in my sweet spot.
That's beautiful. And we didn't prep for this. That is absolutely true. You would be fantastic at that. And I love what you said about like teaching grades that a bunch of kids that are younger. It requires a lot of galvanizing. That will be energizing to some people and absolutely destroying to others. It'll just wreck their level of energy and joy. So that's a great answer, Tracy. Fabulous.
Thank you.
Who's going to go next?
I'll go, Pat. I might be one of the few people who didn't say, oh, hey, I would be a teacher. But since you're asking me that question, I think a disgruntled football coach is probably, no, I'm kidding. there is something. I'll tell you the elements that would not suit my type. Because I'm a discerner galvanizer, so I would need the curriculum sort of spelled out for me. I don't want to invent. So I wouldn't be like a a college professor where I want to invent my own syllabus or something like that. I just want to go, hey, I've curated these 5 books or these 5 concepts or these things that I want our grade to learn. And then I would like the pushing them and galvanizing them into learning those things. So, I'm being a little facetious about like the sports, part of that, but I actually think that would appeal to someone with my type, maybe even more than the classroom setting. Sort of curating what offense we want to run and then getting people rallied to go out and execute that. I might have cheated a little in that question, but
No. That's great.
But I will say that the difference for me is, as Tracy describes having discernment and enablement, the patience of enablement to come alongside and see people get to realizations that or learn new things that they've never learned. That part would be hard for me as someone without enablement. And so the idea of like, I'd want to push and help as much as I can, but without that level of coming alongside and supporting.
And really interesting, it's not a leading question, but I have my own thoughts about this. What subject do you think you would probably teach?
Whichever one has the least graded tests at the end, like, no, I'm teasing. I think
I was thinking that.
There's something around like theory, like philosophy or something like that that's sort of interesting and not something technical like mathematics or science.
You would be a great like history teacher.
Right.
Like,
yes.
I want you to look at why, because it's not about learning. It wouldn't be AP history that you have to go take a test and you teach to the test. It would be like, I want to excite these guys and gals to learn about why this matters. And a DG would be kind of 80-20, let's do this. So that would be great. I got it. How about you, Bo?
Well, let me just say about Cody. Cody, you would be great with teaching where the people is the focus, right? Where it's the challenging the individual. If there was teaching to a test, I think you would be more likely to be frustrated. But if it's the person's development, I think you would really thrive in that environment.
Yeah, but and the only one thing about history, it would be difficult because he'd probably teach them that Ben Franklin was a president of the United States. So he wasn't. So, but other than that,
only the important things.
Bo, you're a inventor galvanizer.
Yeah, I think I of course have thought about being a teacher. That sounds like a blast. On previous episodes, we've talked about how I'd love to be a summer camp counselor. And I think that like middle school age that there needs a lot of galvanizing, Tracy. That's energizing to me. That's really fun. And where there's not such a strictness to teaching to the test, where you would be able to be inventive, to come up with new ways to think about something, to learn something where it's not all standardized. Does that classroom exist? I don't know if it still exists, but that would be the thing that would be fun and life-giving to me.
I can totally see you doing that. And the thing is, we talk about one man's trash or a woman's trash is another man's treasure. The fact that you would love teaching middle school and you would be the best middle school teacher. Everybody would be like, Mr. Johnson, he was the coolest. Because you would have the energy for that and coming up with new ideas. That would be fantastic. Now, I'm an ID and I would like to teach. I think I like to teach adults because I want people like, it would be a dream of mine to teach like screenwriting to a bunch of people that are like, teach us how to write a screenplay because I have ideas. So I would like tap into their invention and evaluate their projects and give them advice about it. I've always thought teaching screenwriting would be great. The other thing is, I had a chance to go onto a college campus last week, Auburn University, War Eagle. It's a great school down in Auburn, Alabama. And I was teaching at an executive MBA program. And so the students there were all people that were coming out of the workforce and learning. And so they really wanted to learn. I didn't have to G them because G is not my thing. And they were asking questions and wanted input and advice and coming up with new ideas about how to do things. So as an ID, I thought that was really fun. I mean, I really enjoyed it. And being a professor or a teacher of really motivated people is something that I would love. That's really fun for me.
Yeah, I totally think, Pat, ID, that sounds accurate. I was even thinking about some of the teachers that stood out in my high school and college career. And actually, I identified one of my AP calculus and AP physics teacher was probably an ID. Like, and what she was particularly good at was figuring out new ways, like discerning, like how are these kids going to learn, and how do we get these complex, formulas in their head. She would literally like come up with songs for us to memorize. You wouldn't believe how many like quadratic equations and those types of formulas I know by song, because she was so she didn't want to just teach out of the textbook. She really wanted us to learn it. And I feel like what you would be particularly gifted at is that, like, okay, I know that where we're headed and I want them to learn it, but I'm going to innovate and figure out what works for them, and sort of curate this so that people are internalizing it and we're not just going through the textbook.
Now, you know what would be very bad, though, is if I was like Mrs. Stork was my fourth grade teacher, probably the best teacher I ever had. Back then, that's when we learned multiplication tables and spelling and all those things really well. And she was probably an ET. So she had a syllabus. She knew exactly when we had to do stuff. Everything was on time. She taught us the discipline that we needed. And if I were in charge of teaching kids discipline that they were going to have to use the rest of their life, they would probably go, he was the most fun teacher. And I'm so far behind in math now 3 years later because of that. Because there are different ways to teach, and some subjects and some age groups really need. And what a great thing if schools started using this to assign teachers and hire them. Because if you're teaching youngsters and you got to keep them in line, if you don't have G, that's going to be hard. Similarly, if you're teaching higher level people and you're trying to inspire them and you don't have other geniuses, like my wife is a WI, she would be a great teacher for like student government and like provoking their thinking. But she'd probably forget to grade their tests for weeks. We all had teachers like that. They love her, but they're like, are you going to grade my test?
I was just going to ask to say, okay, we haven't talked so much about wonder or tenacity. And so let's talk a little bit about that. How would somebody with the genius of wonder be as a teacher?
I think in a small class where you had motivated students and you were teaching something heady, I think it would be fantastic, because they would ask questions and challenge you to think about things. I remember I had a professor in college who taught me philosophy, and it was a small class. It was like 12 students sitting around a table. And that wonder was really fun to play with. Probably not great to be a wonder. I mean, I don't know if it would lend itself to math so much, where that's pretty closely broken down, unless it was theoretical math stuff, quantum mechanics or something like that. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I was even thinking like art is kind of interesting too, because like identifying what is possible or not yet there, or like sort of challenging people to think outside of what is already, a block below wonder. I think that philosophy definitely came to mind, art, all of those sort of nuanced ones where the idea is to expand our canvas and not necessarily work from what we already know, like mathematics. We have years of just like, hey, this is how you teach it. I mean, this is what's great is they probably could teach any of these things, like even some of the ones that are a little more difficult, but knowing the parameters where that wonder gets to come out in that classroom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Poetry, Karen said. Maybe that would be one. Laura would be a great poetry teacher. She loved poetry. I was like, what are you talking about? But she loved that. I think that's why teachers' aides are so important. I don't know if all classes have teachers' aides, but more and more classes, there's a teacher and then a teacher's aide. And having an aide that fills in your gaps would be huge. And I think that's where working genius is so important, because you really would want somebody who loved to do the things that you don't love to do.
Totally. And when you think about the way we talk about this with team spats, like this is very obvious. When every job requires everything from wonder and invention all the way through tenacity, and you're a single person and that you're not a team. So like when we talk about teacher burnout, you could probably tie it back to this very thing, which is like a DE like Tracy who gets a classroom that needs lots of galvanizing is probably quitting because she can't rally the kids and it gets frustrating over time. And like, but whereas I might quit because of the tedium of like getting all the grades at the right time, I'd have no tenacity. And so it's so helpful for you to go into this job or any job realizing, hey, here's how I'm going to be really good at this. And then also I need some help in some other areas.
And if I'm a principal, I want to know what my teachers' geniuses are, so I know they don't all need the same thing from me. And that's for coaching and managing them. I mean, I wonder how customized most principals are when it comes to helping out their teachers. And since we're starting school right now, this is an interesting thing. Well, I would love it if I had been a student and people would have said, hey, here's Mrs. Stork, and here's what she's great at, and here's what you can expect from her. She's probably not so great at this, so you might need to talk to your parents about that or find somebody else. It would be really helpful. And Karen just wrote something down next to me, which is fantastic, and that is, and this is a whole different podcast or a whole different thing, and that is, wouldn't it be great if teachers understood the working geniuses of their students?
I was just going to say that very thing. That's a total game changer. And because, not only to then have context for how they learn and what they enjoy, but I remember many times feeling like I'm a bad student because I wasn't showing up to the classroom the same way other students were. And looking back, it's very much related to my working genius. Had my teacher known the context of how I was wired, not to say we just give people grace, oh, hey, Cody doesn't turn in homework because he doesn't have tenacity. We'll just let that go. But the idea that there would be a backdrop and context for understanding the way I'm wired, that would have been a game changer from a student level.
Well, and a teacher could say, hey, Cody, I'm going to teach you something. Get a piece of paper out. You're going to use this all year. And I'm going to make you track every day what you need to do because you don't have T. And of course, the the other thing is you could help kids help one another because you're a DG and she would probably be able to say, hey, Cody, you have a good sense of the bigger picture and motivating people. I want you to help me in my class to do this. I mean, tapping into those working genius could make the classroom such a better experience too.
When you think about it's true, even the opposite, like the school system might be more designed for someone with enablement and tenacity as a student. Like, hey, do what you're told, in the sense of like, here's your homework and you want to do the right thing and come alongside and support. But that person, like I have a friend, we've hired someone I went to high school with, Julie, who when it came to writing a paper, she has discernment and tenacity. Her struggle was, I don't know what to write about. Invention can be a struggle, or wonder and invention the same way. She was good at the execution of school, but the difficulty that came to her was like, it still puts pressure on students to come up with a new idea, or we would have a science fair, innovation contest, or something like that. That can also be a burden for kids. It's not just how do we get them to execute on the tenacity part of school.
Exactly. Gosh, that could really transform the way we educate and how we would stop. And again, it's not an excuse. It's not like, well, you don't have to turn in your work because you have no T. But it's about how to get them to engage in their schoolwork in a way that actually makes sense for them and brings them joy and energy. And then how to actually manage their frustrations, because we all have to do that too.
Yeah, it makes me think about something Cody has said for years, which is, well, what's the best kind of leader? What's the best pairing for a leader? A self-aware leader. And I think this conversation is illuminating that. All 15 pairings, right? A teacher could have all 6 types of genius and be a great teacher. And self-awareness sure helps to know what elevation of conversation you love as a teacher, to know like you're most likely to take the classroom setting and make it be something that you love, even when it's not always what's needed. So how fun. Grateful for
There's
our teachers.
So much to talk. Yeah. There's so much to talk about in this. I think that we could do a whole series on just education and working genius.
Well, let's do like a little teaser cliffhanger at least, Pat, because we have gone down this road a little bit, which is you and the content team have been changing the assessment a little bit towards a more student-oriented approach to the assessment, one that's digestible in students in a wide range of years in school could take this and find out who they are and then be able to interact with their studies, their schoolwork, their career aspirations earlier. So we're not done with that. I'm not trying to tell people that's coming out next week, but I do think it's fun for people at the end of this episode to realize, hey, that's important to us. We think it would be a game changer, and we're gonna put some tools out there for students and teachers and parents to really understand working genius at that level.
And Cody, even before that comes out, and we're pretty close. Even before that comes out, just a teacher understanding, there's 6 types of working genius. And by the way, doing work in class is work. And you can just look at students and go, that kid's in his head all the time, and he's kind of hesitant and he's really pondering things. 3 of my kids are W's, and I know you can see it almost. I mean, that's the least observable one. And then the I one, it's like, let's do this. I have another idea. Giving them an outlet for that. And then, of course, the ET students are the ones like, Mrs. So-and-so, what's the rubric for this class? I'm going to get it all done. That was pretty easy even without the assessment, a teacher can look at it and say, all of these kids have a pairing or a working genius, and I need to be aware of that. Okay. Hey, this is interesting. Share this with any teachers you know, any principals you know. I think that this could make a big difference. Cody, did you have one more thing you wanted to say?
I just thought it would be fun to share with the listeners. Your son, Matt, has explicitly asked you to not do an accent at the end and say, all righty. But I personally love that that's how you end many of these episodes. So love it. Stick with it, Pat. I'm on your team. Keep doing the accent, and I'll let you close it out now.
That's right. All right. Well, thanks for joining us on the Working Genius podcast. We love talking to you, and we'll talk to you next time. God bless.